Section 1 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Maria Therese. The Boy Who Was Afraid in the Dark. I won't tell you where he lived. It would really surprise you. And I won't tell you his real name, because I think you would know him. So suppose we call him Jimmy. Jimmy was the boy who was afraid in the dark, so afraid that his mother had to sit by his bed till he fell asleep and had to leave the bright ceiling light burning all night long. Oh, often his mother tried to teach him to be brave in the dark. I heard her myself many times. Not long ago I heard her telling him at bedtime, "Remember, Jimmy, God's everywhere." She paused to let "everywhere" bounce around in Jimmy's thoughts. Then she added, "And you know where everywhere is." Jimmy nodded and said, "Everywhere is all over." "And that means, Jimmy, that God's right here," his mother went on. "Please try to remember." A wrinkle jumped on Jimmy's forehead, and he asked, "But is he in the dark too?" "Even in the darkest dark," answered his mother, "and he sees us and loves us and watches over us." But Jimmy wouldn't learn. That's why I knew it was going to happen. And sure enough, it did. One dark, stormy night, the light in Jimmy's room flickered and burned out. There was a loud clap of thunder, and Jimmy awoke. His room was so dark it was like waking up in a bottle of ink. Did Jimmy do as his mother told him? Did he try to remember that God was with him and watching over him? Sorry to say, he didn't. Rather, he let himself become scared. Not just a little scared, but very, very scared, and then much more scared till, all of a sudden, it happened. Jimmy let himself get so scared that he became scared stiff, so stiff that he couldn't move. His knees became locked, his head couldn't turn, his elbows couldn't bend. If it weren't for the fact he could still breathe and still swallow and still open his eyes, you would have thought he was just a big piece of cardboard. So it was his mother found him in the morning, stiff as a piece of cardboard. I wish you could have seen how his mother tried to help him. First she rushed to the bathroom cabinet for the bottle of alcohol. She rubbed his legs up and down and under and over, but they wouldn't move. Then she put an electric pad on his elbows, but they just wouldn't bend. Then she dashed for the heat lamp and turned it on full force. But all with no success. She couldn't get Jimmy loosened up again. Just picture what a sight he made at the breakfast table. He couldn't sit in his usual chair, because he couldn't bend. He couldn't pick up the cereal spoon, nor reach for the toast, nor lift the glass of orange juice. So his mother had to stand him against the table and feed him. Once the strawberry jam on his toast brushed against his nose, and he couldn't lift his hand to wipe it off. Jimmy was solidly stiff. And it was worse right after breakfast when his playmates came in to play. He couldn't bounce his rubber ball. He couldn't pile his building toys. He couldn't color his picture books. When his playmates began to play ping-pong, he could only stand by the side of the table. Once the ping-pong ball hit him on the side of the head and bounced off into the fishbowl. Now that would happen only to a boy who had gotten scared stiff. That night it was more of the same. Jimmy couldn't kneel to say his night prayers, nor could he jump into bed. So his mother propped him up against the side of the bed while he said his night prayers. She had to make his sign of the cross because he couldn't bless himself. As soon as the sign of the cross was finished, she said, "Now remember, Jimmy, God's real close, and he's just as close in the dark." Jimmy's ears were stiff, but it's good to say he could hear every word his mother said. Jimmy's mother placed him flat on his back in the bed. As she pulled the covers up to his chin, she added, "And remember, God loves you and is watching over you." With that, she smoothed out Jimmy's blanket, and there he lay, stiff as a newly made ice cube. That was how it happened that Jimmy became scared stiff, and nothing could loosen him up again. Well, during the night Jimmy slept soundly, of course without any turns or bends. Suddenly the light in the ceiling began to grow dim. I should tell you that it wasn't a brand new light. It had been taken from the ceiling in his mother's room. Then, flicker and poof! It too burned out. Once again Jimmy's room was in darkness. No one knows yet why Jimmy suddenly awoke. I think maybe his guardian angel stirred him in some gentle way, because without any warning, Jimmy awoke. He looked straight up at the ceiling. He was so stiff that was the only way he could look. But the light was out and the room was very dark, deep tunnel dark. In fact, nighttime had coated Jimmy's room with 7 layers of darkness. Jimmy could have gotten scared and panicky all over again. He could have, but he didn't. This time he remembered what his mother had told him. So right off he said, "Dear God, I'm not afraid because you're here with me in the dark and watching over me." With that he felt something twist in his knee, and, by golly, he could bend it as much as he wanted. Then something twisted in his neck, and, goodness me, he could turn his head any way he wished. Then something twisted in his elbow, and, happy days, he could touch his face again. As quickly as that, he was all loosened up again, and a mighty happy fellow you can bet. The next morning his mother walked into his room at the usual time. Jimmy was waiting quietly, the covers up to his chin. His mother looked up at the ceiling and saw the light was out. She uttered, one on top of the other, "Oh dear, oh dear." But that was as far as she got, because in one mighty leap Jimmy jumped out of bed and threw his arms around her and hugged her tight. Happy tears came running down her face. Now Jimmy's mother no longer sits by his bed at night. No longer is the bright ceiling light kept burning. And, happy to say, months have passed away, and Jimmy hasn't been stiff even once. Oh, sometimes he might begin to get scared in the dark, but then he remembers that God is everywhere, even in the dark, and that blows the scare away. And that's the best place for it, don't you think? End of The Boy Who Was Afraid in the Dark. Section 2 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Christmas Looking. There it was, an old skinny building with its shoulders against the shoulders of other old buildings. There it was that Johnny lived with his mother and father and younger sister Sharon. Up the long flight of stairs we climb, up to the 4th floor, to the door marked 44. Now, of course, it wouldn't be at all polite to just walk right in, but we're not really walking, we're only visiting in our thoughts. So through the door in our thoughts we go. Not much to see, just some plain furniture, not even as good as some of the old furniture Mother has in the basement. Yet everything is clean and in apple pie order. Bouncing into the room comes Johnny, pushing his arm through his coat. His mother and Sharon are waiting. It is the week before Christmas, and all 3 are going Christmas looking. Not Christmas shopping, mind you. Christmas looking. How do I know? Well, just listen to Johnny's mother. Remember now, we're only going looking. No getting at all, Mommy? No getting at all, Johnny. But to take away some of the sadness, she added, maybe next Christmas. So you see, Johnny's family was poor. That explains why their coats look 3 winters too old, maybe even 4. But you don't need any money to go Christmas looking. All you need is a pair of good eyes. And God had blessed Johnny with these. Up the escalator Johnny rode with his mother and sister. You don't need money for that. Just 2 strong legs. And God had blessed Johnny with these. Toyland was on the 5th floor, and boys and girls all shapes and sizes had found it. In the middle of Toyland sat Santa Claus himself. His head was bent and his ears alert, as hundreds of wishes poured in. It was now a doll from an excited little miss, now a bike from a little gent, now a toy truck, now a painting set, and a game and a music box, and on went the wishes. And Santa kept nodding his merry white head. But let's not lose Johnny in the busy buzzing crowd. There he is over by the electric trains. His eyes are fastened on the locomotive. Through the tunnel, across the river, up the hilly grade, then smoothly into the station it pulls the obedient freight cars. Johnny beams with joy. I can't say how many times he watched as the locomotive swept through the tunnel, across the river, up the hilly grade, then smoothly into the station. I can say, though, that once I heard him whisper, "Dear God, I'm glad you gave me these strong eyes. I certainly am." I guess Johnny would still be there if his mother hadn't caught his attention and said, "Come, Johnny, Sharon wants to hear the music boxes." The music box counter was a wonder of its own. Little misses and their mothers listened as one by one the music boxes played their happy songs. Sharon secretly wished some day she might have one all her own. Johnny secretly wished some day he might give her one. His mother secretly wished a brighter Christmas might come soon. But this Christmas Sharon and Johnny and Mother just listened. To Sharon and Johnny this was a treat. Toyland was full of things to see and sounds to hear, and Johnny missed very few of them. After Toyland came the escalator. Johnny and Sharon and their mother glided from the top of the store to the bottom, and from the bottom to the top, and started all over again. It was on the second ride up that I overheard Johnny say, "Dear God, I'm glad you gave me these strong legs. How could I bounce around without them?" It was on the way out of the store that our 3 Christmas lookers stopped at the counter selling Christmas cribs. There were cribs all sizes, with figures all sizes. Johnny knew all the figures very well. Many times his mother had told him and Sharon the Christmas story. As he studied the infant Jesus, he thought of the first Christmas and said, "Little Lord Jesus, you didn't have fancy clothes either." And looking at the stone manger, he said, "Your bed was harder than mine." And as he looked at the floor by the manger, "I wish I could have given you my throw rug." Then to his mother he said, "The little Lord Jesus was kind of poor, wasn't he?" "Yes, Johnny," answered his mother, "but only on the outside. Inside he was rich beyond telling. It was this he came to share." Johnny listened intently, and his mother continued, "His was the biggest love that ever lived on earth." Johnny didn't understand all of that, but it made him feel happy and warm deep within. The 3 Christmas lookers climbed the long flights of stairs in the old skinny building. They opened door 44. They were home again. As Johnny slipped his arm from his coat, he said, "Even just looking is fun." But, as it turned out, it wasn't just looking. Johnny had been looking, but he had been praying too, and God was pleased with Johnny's quick prayers. And so it was that Johnny came home with something added, more of God's love in his innocent heart. His mother had said, "No getting it all, Johnny." She was speaking only of toys. But there is more than toys in this world, of course, even for a person visiting Toyland. And so it turned out that Johnny went not just looking, but getting too, getting more of a precious gift for his soul from God. And I hope you will agree, that's worth more than all the toys in Toyland. End of Christmas Looking. Section 3 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Peter Patrick Pancake. The doctor tapped his fingers on his desk. "Most unusual," he murmured aloud. He was referring to Peter Patrick Pancake, the boy who couldn't laugh or smile or chuckle. And unusual it was because he had just tickled Peter Patrick Pancake under the chin with a feather. Any other boy or girl would have chuckled right off, but not Peter. Peter twitched one cheek, then the other cheek, but, try as he might, he couldn't laugh, he couldn't smile, he couldn't chuckle. "Most unusual," the doctor murmured again. And unusual it was, because otherwise Peter was a real live-wire boy. He could fly kites, roller skate, eat ice cream cones, blow up balloons. But try as he might, he couldn't laugh, he couldn't smile, he couldn't chuckle. And try he often did. When Peter was putting on his coat in another room, the doctor again tapped his fingers on his desk and said, "I'm afraid I haven't any pills that can help him." With concern, Peter's mother exclaimed, "But there must be something we can do, doctor." The doctor tapped a little more and answered, "The only cure I know is for Peter to see such a happy sight he will just have to laugh right out with joy." He nodded his head and tapped some more and repeated, "Just have to." That night, Mrs. Pancake, remembering that Saturday was Peter's birthday, said to Auntie Till, Mrs. Pancake's twin sister, who was staying for a visit, "Perhaps a birthday party might be the happy sight." "Perhaps it might," repeated Auntie Till. And so it was that, when Peter came in from play on Saturday afternoon, his playmates, hidden in the dining room, all yelled, "Surprise!" Peter could see Tommy and Jerry and Sandy and Kathy, and a ceiling full of balloons, and a pile of presents, 1 boy high, and a birthday cake with just the right number of candles. It made a happy sight. Peter twitched one cheek, then he twitched the other cheek. He twitched and he twitched, but, try as he might, he couldn't laugh, he couldn't smile, he couldn't chuckle. It wasn't what the doctor ordered. Disappointed, Mrs. Pancake said to Auntie Till, "I wonder what the happy sight might be." "I wonder," repeated Auntie Till. 1 week went by. Mrs. Pancake kept thinking and wondering. "If only Peter could laugh and smile and chuckle," sighed Mrs. Pancake. "If only he could," repeated Auntie Till. It wasn't too long, however, before the second happy sight was ready. One night, right after supper, Mrs. Pancake took Peter by the hand down into the playroom. On a raised platform over in a corner of the playroom stood a fully equipped moon station. It had moon vehicles and launching pads and rocket ships, quite enough to take one's breath away. Peter bubbled with joy. He twitched one cheek, then he twitched the other cheek. He twitched and he twitched, but, try as he might, he couldn't laugh, he couldn't smile, he couldn't chuckle. It wasn't what the doctor ordered. The following Sunday morning, when all the Pancakes were home from Mass, Mrs. Pancake took Peter to the back window. She parted the curtains and pointed. But she didn't have to point, because Peter nearly jumped through the window with joy. For there on the lawn stood a brown and white pony with regular cowboy harness and Peter's name written across the saddle in silver buttons. It was a truly happy sight. Mrs. Pancake watched Peter anxiously. He twitched one cheek, then he twitched the other cheek. He twitched and he twitched, but, try as he might, he couldn't laugh, he couldn't smile, he couldn't chuckle. It wasn't what the doctor ordered. When dinner time came that particular Sunday, it seemed much too soon for Peter. But Mrs. Pancake called him only once, and the brand new cowboy swung off his pony and onto the ground. Not a whimper, not a frown, not a single sour note. He tied the pony reins to the post, and in he came to wash for dinner. Peter Patrick Pancake didn't know how to laugh or smile or chuckle, but how to obey he most certainly knew. That night Peter was sitting on the side of his bed, buttoning his pajama top. Making not the slightest fuss, his guardian angel sat down beside him. "Peter," the angel said in a very kindly manner, "I want you to see the shine a good deed makes when seen from heaven." So saying, the guardian angel turned a very special camera upon the wall, and the camera began to play a moving picture. Peter's eyes popped because he was in it. The picture showed dinner time that particular Sunday. It showed Peter's mother calling him for dinner. It showed Peter swinging off his pony without a whimper or frown or single sour note. It showed him skipping up the steps for dinner. But as he entered the house, there began to glow around him a radiant and beautiful light. It was softer than summer evening sunlight. It was delightful beyond compare. And little wonder! This was the shine Peter's act of obeying made in heaven. Peter almost burst with gladness at the sight. With not a single twitch, with not even a try at a twitch, he began to laugh and smile and chuckle. It was such a happy sight that he just had to laugh and smile and chuckle. So joyously did he laugh, so heartily did he chuckle, that his mother in the parlor dropped a potato chip, and Auntie Till dropped another. "Who could it be in Peter's room?" Mrs. Pancake gasped. "Who could it be?" repeated Auntie Till. It took but a moment to open the door to learn the answer. It was Peter himself, sitting alone once more on the side of his bed, his pajama top still unbuttoned, and laughs and smiles and chuckles bouncing from him in happy procession. As best he could, Peter told what happened, and soon laughs and smiles and chuckles were bouncing from everyone in even happier procession. Peter Patrick Pancake had found at last just what the doctor ordered. Or rather, his guardian angel had found it, the shine a good act sends to heaven. End of Peter Patrick Pancake. Section 4 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. The Boy Who Thought God Was Hiding. Mickey was having his breakfast. In fact, the upper half of his cereal was finished. Taking some toast from the toaster, his mother asked, "Did you say your morning prayers, Mickey?" Mickey lowered his head and muttered, "Forgot again." He dipped his spoon into the cereal bowl and went on, "Why can't I see God even just a faint bit? Then I wouldn't forget." But without waiting for his mother to answer, he asked, "Is God really hiding?" "No, He isn't," answered his mother, "but we have to learn how to look for Him. You, Mickey, will have to look much sharper." With that ringing in his ears, Mickey worked his way quietly to the bottom of his cereal bowl, which can always be found in the same place in every cereal bowl. Later that morning Mickey's mother was in the basement laundering the clothes. Mickey was in the parlor playing with his covered wagon. Most unexpectedly his guardian angel tapped him upon the shoulder, smiled, and said, "Mickey, I want to show you how to look a little sharper." Then in a most kindly manner he added, "And don't worry, we'll be back before your mother misses you." Without losing a moment the guardian angel and Mickey sailed through the doorway, Mickey in the angel's strong right arm. Mickey lost count of the chimneys they passed, but very shortly they landed in a farmer's field. It turned out to be the pumpkin patch. Even a boy from the middle of the city could tell that. Reaching inside the fold of his stainless robe, the angel drew out something that looked like a little window shade. He rolled it open till it made a midget movie screen and put it between Mickey and a big yellow pumpkin. How big? Big enough to make 3 grandmother pies. Without the slightest delay a message in golden letters appeared on the snowy white chart. Mickey's eyes twinkled with excitement and he thought to himself, "Wonder what it says?" So the angel read the message aloud. "God is good, all good." The angel waited a moment and then he explained. "The pumpkin, Mickey, shows us some of God's goodness." But Mickey looked puzzled. So the angel continued, "God makes the pumpkin grow and grow to the size of 3 grandmother pies so we will have food to keep us strong." But the boy who thought God was hiding had nothing to say. There was no time to waste, for Mickey's mother was working busily in the basement. So away went Mickey and the angel. This time they landed in a field of buttercups, each one delicate and soft, but really not full of butter, because Mickey bent over and looked. "Not a bit of butter," he thought to himself. Quickly the angel unrolled the message chart between Mickey and the buttercups. Once again a message jumped across the screen. This time the angel read, "God is beautiful, all beautiful." He looked at Mickey, but Mickey was as silent as his shoelaces. So the angel explained, "If we know how to look, the buttercup shows us some of God's beauty." He paused, rolled up the chart and repeated, "If we know how to look." But the boy who thought God was hiding had nothing to say. Wasting not a minute, the angel and Mickey sailed over the ocean of buttercups to the ocean of waves. Mighty waves rolled along beneath them. As Mickey watched, a mighty wave caught an ocean liner 2 blocks long and thousands of tons heavy. It lifted the ocean liner as easily as if it were a bottle cork. Sure enough, another message appeared on the midget movie screen. The angel read, "God is mighty, almighty." But the boy who thought God was hiding had nothing to say. So the angel explained, "The ocean waves show us some of God's power. That is, if we know how to look." On sped the ocean waves, but the angel and Mickey sped faster. This time they flew cloud high over a boy helping his sister up from a fall. Even that high the midget movie screen had a message. "God is kind," the angel read, "all kind." The angel added nothing else. He just watched Mickey very closely. But the boy who thought God was hiding had nothing to say. Then over a church they sailed. With the angel along, Mickey found he could see through the roof as easily as if it were of glass. Mickey stared in wonderment, and as he stared, a little girl passed the tabernacle and genuflected on one knee. Sure enough, the angel had the wonderful chart unrolled, and sure enough it had a message. "God is holy," the angel read, "so very holy." The angel reverently bowed his head and continued, "all holy." But the boy who thought God was hiding had nothing to say. So the angel explained, "Good people can show us some of God's holiness." Again he paused to look at Mickey, and then he continued, "That is, if we know how to look." Mickey's mother had almost finished the laundry, and so the once-in-a-million-years excursion had to come to an end. Back through the doorway sped the guardian angel and Mickey. As the angel set Mickey down alongside the covered wagon where the wonderful trip began, he said, "Remember, Mickey, we live in a room with 1,000 mirrors." Mickey's eyes blinked at that. With a parting smile, the angel concluded, "Look into those mirrors carefully, Mickey, and you will see God's goodness in 1,000 different ways." With that, the angel was gone. Almost before Mickey could catch another breath, his mother stepped up from the basement. "Mommy!" burst out Mickey. "Did you know we live in a room with 1,000 mirrors?" Mickey's mother looked puzzled. All excited, Mickey hurried on. "Look into those mirrors carefully, and you will see God's goodness in 1,000 different ways." Was this the boy who had nothing to say? Was this the boy who was as silent as his shoelaces? This was the boy, but now with 102 things to say. Out they came: pumpkins, buttercups, ocean waves, kind deeds, and every message on the midget movie screen. At the end, Mickey's mother, wide-eyed with wonder, said, "I don't believe anyone could look sharper than that." And that seems true to me. Never again was Mickey heard to say, "Is God really hiding?" And the reason? Because he never forgot about the 1,000 mirrors and the way the angel taught him to look into them. And now that's quite a change, don't you think? End of The Boy Who Thought God Was Hiding. Section 5 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Puff, Wrinkle, and Squint. Our story begins at breakfast in the home of a boy named Jerry who had a 4-year-old sister, Terry. Jerry was forever teasing Terry, especially with mean old faces. Over his cereal bowl this particular day he put on one of his mean old faces. He puffed out his cheeks, he wrinkled his nose, he squinted his eyes. Over her cereal bowl it was a mean old sight for Terry to see. Over her second cup of coffee, Jerry's mother caught him in the act and said, "If that face ever freezes, you'll be mighty sorry." Jerry just laughed and on the sly went right on teasing, because after breakfast and before lunch and during lunch he was at it again. It was during lunch his mother caught him again and said once more, "If that face ever freezes, you'll be mighty sorry." But Jerry just laughed, and as soon as his mother turned her back, he put on one of his meanest faces. He wrinkled his nose, he puffed out his cheeks, he squinted his eyes, and he was just about to stick out his tongue when the dreadful thing happened. His face, without the slightest warning, froze tight, rubbery tight, but tight just the same. He couldn't get the wrinkle out of his nose, he couldn't get the puff out of his cheeks, he couldn't get the squint out of his eyes. Puff, wrinkle, squint were there to stay. It was a blessing he hadn't stuck out his tongue, because he wouldn't have been able to get it in again. With a scream, he called to his mother. Quick as could be, she pressed in his cheeks, but pop! Out they puffed again. She smoothed out the wrinkles, but crinkle, crinkle, they marched right back again. She stretched away the squint, but blink-o-blink, it bounced right back again. His face was frozen tight, and that meant the mean expression had frozen there to stay. A frozen face is bad enough, but a frozen face with a mean expression is 80 times worse. Don't you agree? Right after nap time there came a call for Jerry. One of his playmates wanted him to come out to play. Jerry's mother answered the call and said, "Jerry isn't coming out today." You can easily guess the reason why. He didn't want his playmates to see that mean squinty look frozen on his face. Can you blame him for that? "Maybe tomorrow, Bobby," said Jerry's mother. As she closed the door, she whispered a quick prayer that God make it so. Jerry sat in his room near the window. He couldn't even ask his playmates in to play, because who wanted to look at mean squinty eyes or a wrinkled nose or a puffed out face? It was the kind of a face you see at Halloween. The big difference was, Jerry couldn't take it off and hide it in the drawer. "If only I could," he sighed to himself. At that precise moment, Jerry's grandfather wandered past the window, puttering among the shrubbery. Ever since grandmother had gone home to God, he had lived with Jerry. Jerry knew his grandfather must be very wise, because often he heard his mother and father asking him questions. Perhaps Grandpa knew the secret of melting frozen faces, Jerry thought. Whereupon he leaned out the window and called, "Grandpa, could you help me get my right face back again?" Grandpa stopped his puttering. He looked at Jerry kindly but seriously and said, "Were I you, Ciampino," the name he often called Jerry, "I would try 2 things." "You would, Grandpa?" questioned Jerry intently. "I would tell God I'm sorry," went on Grandpa. Then he used a favorite word of his, "powerfully sorry." "And after that," continued Grandpa, "I would be specially kind to my little sister." He clipped a dead twig from the azalea bush and added, "And I guess that would be it." And that was it as far as Jerry was concerned, because no sooner had Grandpa moved along the shrubbery row than Jerry in his seat by the window began praying, "Dear God, I'm sorry for teasing Terry with my mean old faces, powerfully sorry." Jerry knew all along it was teasing and meanness that brought the frozen face. Now he knew it was kindness that could melt the freeze away. "If only it would," he said to himself. In this proper mood, Jerry walked into the rumpus room. The Puff, the Wrinkle, the Squint went right along with him. Wherever Jerry went, they were sure to go. So it is with frozen faces. Terry was playing all alone with her dollhouse. Other times Jerry would wander by and teasingly push over some of the furniture. Other times, but not this time. He sat down beside her instead and told her where he thought the television piece should go. And so they began to play house together. And in a wink it happened. The puff in his cheeks just puffed itself away, for all at once the puff was gone, and Jerry's cheeks were all unpuffed again. Later that afternoon, Jerry's mother asked him if he would go upstairs and get the music box, because Terry wanted to listen to it. "Sure, Mom," answered Jerry, whose face wore only the wrinkle and the squint, and away he went. But he had taken only 1 step when he felt his nose go a tingle and a stretch, and just like that the wrinkle stretched himself away. At supper that night it was ice cream for dessert. As Jerry's mother was getting ready to dish it out, Jerry, now wearing only the squint, said, "Terry first, Mom." That did it, for no sooner were the words out than popsicle! The squint faded completely away. And with that the puff, wrinkle, and squint were gone. The mean old expression had melted all away. That was 3 months ago, and not once in all that time has Jerry's mother had to say, "If that face ever freezes, you'll be mighty sorry." Because not once has Jerry put on that mean old face to tease his little sister. If you ask Jerry the reason why, he'll say, "Maybe the frozen face might come back again. Maybe I wouldn't find the way to melt it away. And besides, God doesn't like it." Which, of course, is the biggest reason of all. And so I think it's safe to say that the puff, the wrinkle, and the squint have gone away to stay. End of Puff, Wrinkle, and Squint. Section 6 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. The Blown Around Room. That Stephen Stay-Awake had a blown-around room is very easy to see. Here it is early Monday morning. Just glance around his room and see. 1 shoe is under the bed and upside down. The other shoe is filled with checkers on the windowsill. His baseball bat is sticking out the dresser drawer. His baseball glove is tied to the window shade. His storybooks are scattered here and there and everywhere. His shirt is on the floor. Stephen's room looks as if a twister of wind from the windy North Pole had just passed through. But really it didn't have to, because a twister every bit as twisty is under the covers, and his name is Stephen Stay-Awake. It was early Monday morning. Stephen's mother came in to call him for school. She looked around Stephen's room. Then she slowly shook her head. "Stephen," she said, "you're the most topsy-turvy boy on our block." Then she looked again and added, "Your room is the most blown-around room I've ever seen." As she bent to pick up Stephen's shirt, she continued, Jesus would never have a blown-around room like this. And that's as true can be. Stephen rolled out of bed. He knelt down to say his morning prayers. Stephen's room was blown around, but not Stephen's soul, for the boy who prays is a good long way from having a blown-around soul. As Stephen reached for his second shoe, the one all filled with checkers, he could still hear his mother saying, "Stephen, you're the most topsy-turvy boy on our block." But would she be able to say it on Tuesday morning? Something tells me maybe not. When Stephen reached the table for breakfast, he knew right away his mother was going to bake. Are you wondering why? Because he saw the canister of flour and the shortening and the pie plate. In Stephen's house that meant today Mommy bakes. So Stephen wasn't at all surprised when his mother said, "Aunt Susie is coming to visit, so I'm going to bake a pie." Stephen even knew it would be a butternut squash pie. Otherwise, what was that big butternut squash doing next to the pie plate? And besides, didn't Aunt Susie like butternut squash pie best of all? On the way to school, Stephen thought of the big butternut squash next to the pie plate, and that made him think of the butternut squash pie. And that made him think of his mother saying, "So I'm going to bake a pie." And all Stephen's thinking didn't stop there. Suppose, make-believe, he went on thinking, that someone was coming to visit me. Suppose, make-believe, it was Jesus. That made him think of his storybooks scattered here and there and everywhere. And that made him think of his mother saying, "Stephen, you have the most blown-around room I've ever seen." And that made him say, "So I better see that my room is in order." With Jesus coming, what else could he do? As it turned out, it was lucky he did. That night, Stephen went to his room with a twinkle in his eye. He was thinking of his supposed make-believe visit. And a slipper-pipper-dip, he was kneeling down saying his night prayers. Now, if you don't mind, glance around Stephen's room. Aren't you surprised? So am I. Why, it isn't blown around tonight. Far from it. Everything is in place. His shoes are under the bedroom chair, brushed and ready to start for school. His storybooks are standing like wooden soldiers along the top of his desk. His shirt is draped across the back of his chair. His baseball glove and bat are neatly set in the corner. His checkers are in the checker box. No North Pole twister has passed through his room tonight. Stephen blessed himself and stood up. He turned to look around his room and see that everything was just where it ought to be. And right then it happened. His guardian angel appeared before him, smiling happily at Stephen and holding in his hand a mirror made of gleaming silver. I wish you could have peeked into the angel's mirror. If you could have, you would be talking about it still. For the mirror showed not just people and chairs and walls and lamps as all mirrors do. It showed things that only angels see. No wonder Stephen got excited when the angel said, "Look in, Stephen." He held the mirror so Stephen could. Stephen caught his breath and looked. Most wonderful to say, he could see what his guardian angel could see. He could see right inside his own soul. And there on a golden throne the Lord Jesus sat, surrounded by a soft and radiant light. Between the eyes of Jesus and Stephen ran a bridge, and love kept crossing back and forth. Stephen could have looked till the kitchen faucet ran dry, even longer. But soon the angel moved the silver mirror away. With one last happy nod, he and the mirror were gone. Then Stephen sat on the edge of his bed. He folded his arms across his breast and whispered, "Lord Jesus, you didn't have to visit me. You were already here." Right then, Stephen made up his mind he would never again let his room become all blown around, because now he knew each time he went into his room, Jesus went with him. So thinking, Stephen slipped into bed. He was one whole boy of happiness. Soon, about as long as a candle sputters or a falling leaf flutters, he fell asleep. On Tuesday morning his mother came to call him for school. She saw the checkers all packed in the checker box, and she gasped happily. Then she saw the storybooks standing like soldiers, and she gasped more happily still. Then she saw the shoes and the baseball bat, and she gasped so loudly that Stephen awoke. He awoke and he listened, but he didn't hear her say, "Stephen, you're the most topsy-turvy boy on our block," nor, "This is the most blown-around room I've ever seen." Nor did he hear it on Wednesday, nor on Thursday, nor Friday, nor till this very day. For Stephen never forgets that Jesus is living within him, And that turned out to be the best cure for the blown around room. And if you and I remember that Jesus lives within us, too, we'll find that's the best cure for many other things. End of The Blown Around Room. Section 7 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Mean Until. Dusk had come noiselessly as ever. With dusk came bedtime regularly as ever. And with bedtime came a story bewitching as ever. So it was in the Doodle's house. And as we look into the Doodle's bedroom, we find Daddy Doodle sitting cozily in his storytelling chair with Dinny and Dickie Doodle, comfortable in their bed, and their little sister Dolly Doodle on his lap. And, oh yes, a lamp on the table by the window, burning not dimly, not brightly, but just right for a bedtime story. "What story tonight, Dad?" asked Dinny expectantly. "Angels or fairies or spacemen or what?" "Angels, angels!" burst out Dickie. And that's not surprising, because Dickie knew angels could do things fairies couldn't think of doing, and could travel faster than spacemen could ever hope to travel. And as every boy and girl who's worth their weight in gold knows, that's every bit true. "Our story," began Daddy Doodle, "could really be called The Boy Who Was Mean Until—" "Until what?" burst out Dickie, who as you can see was a regular burster outer. "Until the cows come home," chirped Dolly, who heard her uncle say that and wondered if it might be the answer. "Until," continued Daddy Doodle, "and that's the secret of our story. His name was Geoffrey, which doesn't sound mean at all. He lived with his mother and dad and a baby brother and an older sister in a greenhouse in the middle of the block, which doesn't sound mean either. But mothers along the block all used to say, 'That Geoffrey has a mean streak in him.' And, sorry to say, they were right until—" "Until what?" burst out Dickie. "Until the cows come home," chirped Dolly, who thought that was just the thing to say. "Until a certain day in the middle of summer," continued Daddy Doodle. "The morning began as usual. Geoffrey awoke, and his mean streak awoke with him. Oh, of course, you couldn't see it, or I, but God and his guardian angel could. That's the way it is with mean streaks, you know. This was the day Geoffrey was about his meanest. Before lunch he purposely ran over his little brother's foot on his bicycle. No sooner had he done so than the mean streak got wider. Before supper he yanked his sister's hair till tears came to her eyes, and with that the mean streak got wider still. Shortly after that he hit one of his playmates with a sharp stone right on the elbow, and wider went the mean streak. Wider and wider it spread till it had no more space to go. I knew there was going to be trouble, because that night in his prayers he didn't tell God he was sorry, but laughed to himself and tumbled into bed. I just knew there was going to be trouble, because the mean streak needed more space to spread, and yet all the space there was in Geoffrey now was filled. So what could the mean streak do? The only thing it could do. It made more space for itself. And so, as Geoffrey slept, a bump came out above his left eye, followed by a bump above his right eye, and they grew and grew, and at last the mean streak had room enough, and the bumps stood still. Geoffrey was awake but a moment next morning when he felt the bumps, and he dashed to his mother. But what could his mother do but look worried and give him breakfast and rush him off to the doctor? The doctor carefully examined the bumps. Cautiously he pressed them here and there. But after it all he still was puzzled, and this was all he could say. "There's really no danger, but I can't say what they might be." And what else could any doctor have said? Thus it was that Geoffrey got so mean he got bumpy, with bumps that wouldn't go away. That night before falling asleep, Geoffrey was lying in bed thinking to himself, "I wonder what these funny old bumps might be." Suddenly a firm voice, which Geoffrey couldn't recognize, but which was the voice of his guardian angel, said, "They're meanness bumps." There was a pause. Then the voice continued, "and in a serious degree." A moment of quiet followed, for Geoffrey was somewhat startled. Then Geoffrey asked anxiously, "How can I make them go away?" "Begin by telling God you're sorry," came the kindly reply. Another moment of quiet. Geoffrey was busily thinking. Then he asked, "And how can I keep them from ever coming back?" "By not being mean to anyone," quickly came the answer. No moment of quiet this time, for right off Geoffrey blurted out, "But that's hard for me." "Not if you try to see Jesus in everyone," firmly came the answer. Then all remained quiet. No more questions, no more answers, no more were needed, because Geoffrey was already on his knees telling God he was sorry inside for all his mean actions. The very next morning Geoffrey, still wearing his meanness bumps, went out to play. During one of the games a mean feeling came over him, and he was all set to push his playmate through the hedge. But suddenly he remembered the words, "Not if you try to see Jesus in everyone." Quickly he pictured Jesus standing there in place of his playmate. That did it, because, as Geoffrey learned, it's not hard to be kind to Jesus. So the push through the hedge never happened. But something else did. Geoffrey's bumps got smaller. That afternoon Geoffrey came up behind his little brother. He was just about to pinch him on the neck when he remembered, "Not if you try to see Jesus in everyone." And so the pinch never came, and the bumps got even smaller. Before supper Geoffrey could have pulled his sister's hair, but he didn't, and the bumps got ever so small. Now, happy to say, the meanness bumps are all gone, and the mean streak has grown thinner and thinner, and one day may fade completely away. For Geoffrey is trying his best. "And that," said Daddy Doodle, "is the story of the boy who was mean until—" "Until the cows come home," chirped Dolly, who had dozed off in between. "Oh no," finished Daddy Doodle, "until he learned to see Jesus in everyone. And that's a big lesson we're all trying to learn." And I guess to that we all agree. End of Mean Until. Section 8 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. A Visit to Heaven. It was night time over a week ago. Tommy Tumble was busy saying his night prayers. He was kneeling by his bed praying for his playmate, Jiminy Jumble. Jiminy's heavenly crown was finished and ready, so God sent an angel to bring him home to heaven. For what good is a crown all finished and ready with no one to wear it? As good as a bicycle with no one to ride it, or a kite with no one to fly it. Soon as Tommy said his night prayers, he walked over to his dresser. He reached up beside his statue of the Blessed Mother and picked up his bottle of holy water. He opened the top and sprinkled his room with holy water. Thereupon he blessed himself and jumped into bed. Over on the windowsill, not far from his bed, stood Tommy's jet model airplane. It was 4 inches long and 2 inches high and had slanted wings and a sharp tapered nose. And while Tommy slept, an amazing thing happened. Tommy's 4-inch airplane began to grow. It got longer and higher and still longer and higher, and soon it filled the window space. Then, with its nose pointing out the window, it stopped. It seemed to be waiting for Tommy to awaken. And awaken he did. Almost as if he heard his jet model plane saying, "Come on, Tommy, wake up. We have things to do." The first thing Tommy did was to look toward the window. And, of course, the first thing he saw was his grown-up plane with its nose pointing out the window. With 2 great leaps, Tommy was at the windowsill. "Golly," he said as he rubbed his hand along the plane's side, "I'll bet it can fly like real." "Right you are, Tommy," spoke his guardian angel, but without appearing beside him. "Climb right in." So Tommy did. With a wish and something of a whoosh, the plane shot upward. It whished and whooshed higher and higher, leaving the windowsill far below. Somewhere, and no one can tell where, the jet plane softly floated through a curtain of uttermost calm and came to a stop. There, but a few steps away, stood a great golden door of a gold Tommy had never seen before. Noiselessly it swung ajar. Joyous and radiant, Jiminy Jumble himself stepped through. His face was crowded with happiness, his eyes lit with love. On his head gleamed a crown matchlessly perfect. Tommy breathlessly feasted his wonder-wide eyes. No words could he find, for he knew just beyond spread the kingdom of God. As Tommy watched, the door opened and closed once more, and Jiminy spoke to explain. "The newest saint for heaven is arriving." At long last, Tommy burst out, "Jiminy, what's it like inside?" But Jiminy didn't tell. Instead he replied, "3 guesses, Tommy." Tommy closed his eyes and began to think. In about 10 ticks of a grandfather clock he guessed his first guess. "Is it like a day on a ranch with a cowboy suit and a 2-gallon hat and a pony all your own?" "Tommy," said Jiminy, "heaven is even better than that." With one guess worn out, Tommy thought again. In 5 ticks of a grandfather clock he guessed again. "Is it like a day at the beach with frisky waves, deep white sand, and the sun turned on just right?" "Tommy," answered Jiminy, "heaven is even better than that." Only one guess to go, but Tommy had saved his best guess for last. It took only 2 ticks of the grandfather clock before he said, "Is it like a birthday party with Mom and Dad and brothers and sisters and presents, a whole pile, and ice cream and cake, and nobody gets a tummy ache?" "Tommy," answered Jiminy, "heaven is even better than that." "Better than that?" gasped Tommy. "Multiplied by 1,000,000, confidently answered Jiminy. "For we talk to God, we sing, we pray, and love is a light shining brighter than day." Jiminy let that bounce around a moment in Tommy's thoughts, and then he added, "And since this is God's home, we're all here to stay." As Jiminy turned to step back inside, he continued, "God has room here for you, room for everyone." And as he waved a happy goodbye, he added, "But tell them they must be good." Tommy caught a last look at the happy face, the love-lit eyes, and the crown matchlessly perfect, and all of a sudden the golden door was no longer ajar. The jet plane whished and whooshed through the curtain of uttermost calm, and downward it shot. Its sharp tapered nose pointed towards Tommy's window-sill. Along about as long as before, it glided gently onto the window-sill. Tommy bounced out and into bed, saying to himself, "God has room in heaven for everyone. Some day, if we're good, He'll open the golden door and let us in." As he waited to fall asleep, he could still see the crown, matchlessly perfect, on Jiminy's head, and could still hear him saying, "And we talk to God, we sing, we pray, and love is a light shining brighter than day." Now, how all this happened is very strange, indeed, because the model jet plane with the sharp tapered nose was never known to act like that again. End of A Visit to Heaven. Section 9 of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Maria Therese. Grampy O'Shee tells a story. Jack and Jenny, his younger sister, slipped through the hedge at the back of their house. Hand in hand they crossed the field, alive with color. It seemed as if someone had scattered red and brown and yellow crayons on the trees and flowers, and someone else had come with a huge rolling pin and ruled them thin. It was late October and a Saturday morning. They were on their way to Grampy O'Shee's. Fast by the back porch they found him, gently, not feverishly busy. That's how it was with Grampy these days. His ship was sailing in quiet waters. Grampy was painting storm windows. "Because," he had said to Granny O'Shee, "if fall comes, can winter be far behind?" His painter's hat rode easily upon his head of tumbling white hair, like a rubber raft upon a breaking wave. "Oh ho, my little friends," he greeted Jack and Jenny. "'Tis good to see you, 'tis it is." Jack and Jenny glided to the ground and watched quietly. They had come many Saturday mornings before, and they knew that Grampy would be sure to spin one of his stories. Grampy was as full of stories as he was of white hairs, and that was tumbling over. Grampy's stories were most unusual, but Jack and Jenny liked them. They left a warm feeling inside, like oatmeal on a cold winter morning. Grampy blew a mouthful of smoke from his corncob pipe, dipped the brush afresh in the paint, and with a far-away sound in his voice began, "Across the wide ocean in the land where shamrocks grow, I once visited a monastery high on a hill. If you counted the monks who lived happily inside, you would have counted 72. Jenny's eyes blinked at that. She was thinking of how many times around her fingers she would have to go to count so high. "Some of the monks," continued Grampy, "wrote books, some planted taters, some carved statues, some grew daffodils. But," and here Grampy's voice sounded somewhat mysterious, "there was one monk not very bright. He couldn't write books, he couldn't carve statues, he couldn't grow daffodils. So it was he had the simplest task of all. He answered the monastery door. His name was Brother Kevin. Jack and Jenny felt sorry for the monk who knew so little, but they liked his name right off. Measured by books and skill, Grampy went on, Brother Kevin was at the very bottom. He was number 72. But measured by— well, listen and see if you can guess. Brother Kevin led all the rest. Jack and Jenny determined to do just what Grampy asked. Listen and see if they could guess. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, said Grampy. Cling, clang, rang the monastery bell. All the monks headed toward their room for a nap, or at least an hour of quiet. So did Brother Kevin. He took off his sandals. He was just about to rest his head upon the pillow when cling, cling, clang went the doorbell. Up sat Brother Kevin. He didn't frown. He didn't sigh, nor did he grumble. On went his sandals. Clip-clap, clippity-clap, down the quiet hall he went. He pushed open the big wooden door. "How can I serve you, sir?" he said politely to the man who was standing there. "Brother Monk," said the man, "my children are hungry and I have no food." "Please come in," invited Brother Kevin. The man stepped in. He sat on the bench near the door. He placed his wooden cane against the wall. Straight to the kitchen Brother Kevin went. Soon he was back with a basket of food, cheese, 3 giant loaves of bread, and some fruit. Smiling and grateful, the man went down the steps with a basket of food in his arms. Away to his room went Brother Kevin. He slipped off his sandals. He was just about to rest his head upon the pillow when cling, cling, clang sounded the doorbell. Up sat Brother Kevin. He didn't frown, he didn't sigh, nor did he grumble. On went his sandals. Clip-clap, clippity-clap, down the quiet hall he went. He pushed open the big wooden door. "How can I serve you, sir?" he asked politely. "Brother Monk," answered the boy, "I forgot to say I needed some milk for the baby." To the kitchen once more went Brother Kevin. Soon he was back with a jug of milk in his hand. Smiling and grateful, the man went down the steps with a basket of food and the jug of milk in his arms. To his room again went Brother Kevin. He took off his sandals. He was just about to touch his head on the pillow when cling, cling, clang sounded the doorbell. Up sat Brother Kevin. He didn't frown, he didn't sigh, nor did he grumble. On went his sandals. Clip-clap, clippity-clap, down the quiet hall he went. He pushed open the big wooden door. Who was there but the man with the basket of food and the jug of milk in his arms? "How can I serve you, sir?" politely inquired Brother Kevin. "Brother Monk," said the man, "the last time I was here I forgot my wooden cane." Brother Kevin looked around. Sure enough, there was the wooden cane against the wall. Smiling and happy, the man went down the steps with a basket of food, the jug of milk, and the wooden cane in his arms. Back once more to his room went Brother Kevin. He took off his sandals. His head was just about to touch the pillow when cling, clang sounded the big monastery bell. It was 2 o'clock. The hour of quiet was over. It was time for all the monks to return to their work. Up sat Brother Kevin. Not a frown, not a sigh, not a grumble. Contentedly, Brother Kevin clippity-clapped his way to his bench at the door. With Brother Kevin went his guardian angel, nodding joyously, because he knew that 3 golden stars were now stamped in Brother Kevin's record book under the beautiful word. Here Grampy stopped and looked at Jack and Jenny, wondering if they had guessed. "Under the beautiful word," repeated Grampy. "Patience!" cried out Jack, which proved how closely he had listened. "Brother Kevin was 72 in books and skills," summed up Grampy. "But number 1 in patience," concluded Jenny, which proved that she had listened closely too. As Jack and Jenny came back through the hedge, Jenny couldn't help thinking that maybe not everyone could win stars in books and skill, but everyone could in patience. I think that Jenny was right. Don't you? End of Grampy O'Shee Tells a Story. End of Stories for God's Little Ones by Father John KOENIG.